Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're hailing from. Welcome to another edition of the Level Up Hour. I guess I should say episode these days, but another episode of the Level Up Hour. I am Chris Short, executive producer of OpenShift TV, CNCF ambassador to the stars, et cetera, et cetera. I'm joined by the illustrious Langdon White and two of my fellow Red Hatters today. Langdon, what's going on? Why are there so many people on the call?
Exactly.
It's just us.
You could also you could start using chapter and just mess with everybody.
Ooh.
Yeah.
This chapter of this episode is
right. Exactly. Yeah. So this is the Level Up Hour where we talk about containers and why like they ain't just hype. There's a lot of usefulness to them, and to try to talk about why they might be useful to you as like a RHEL administrator or a developer or whatever, even if you're not using them necessarily in production, even if you're not using them in an orchestrated fashion, just kind of to show you why containers are interesting and what they can let you do. I run a series of points on the show a lot of the time. If you've ever seen the show before, we'll talk about it later, but even for that, I use a container to run that, so I don't have to run like Google's SDK in my laptop. So as just a quick example, we've done a ton of different episodes. I think this is episode like 38, maybe 39 even,
39.
Or chapter 39, as maybe we'll start calling it. But today, let's do the slides and introduce the folks for the show.
Yes.
And that way we can make things less confusing. Maybe.
We'll see.
Depends how it goes. All right, so everybody should see my Coolio slides as always. All discredit goes to me for the quality of the slides that are produced. But these nice little art things over here are pretty cool. All right, so you can find us on Twitter. I'm Langdon with a 1, and Chris Short is Chris Short with a C and an S and another S and 2 H's, and some R's, etc. You get it. And you can also find us on our Discord. Check it out. You can, come and hassle us about what you see on the show, what you might like to see on the show, what other shows you might like to see, or any other kind of random questions about containers and orchestration. You could also ask us about dating, but I highly recommend not do that.
No.
But
not at all.
We are both married, so there's something we're doing right.
Yeah. No.
Yeah.
Spam,
I don't know.
Spam is real.
Yeah, exactly. So, but like I said, we do try to help out, particularly on our Discord. There's a community of people there who might also be able to help with kind of whatever questions or theories you might have. Moving on, today's episode, I got that number completely wrong, clearly.
Wow.
Okay. Is episode 39, not 37. And so this is where we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but every time we have a guest on the show who's from Red Hat, we talk about Red Hat renames teams and titles and stuff like that all the time. It gets very confusing. Internally, we generally speaking try not to expose that to the external world, but sometimes it slips out. So today we have a couple of guests, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves and what exactly their team is called. Because even if I knew it last week, I may not know it this week. Show notes are not live. As I was mentioning to Chris earlier, I've been on vacation for a few days, so I didn't quite get to them. So I will tweet them out as soon as they're ready.
And link to the main repo and chat for everybody.
So. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so they will show up there as soon as I get them done. And actually, I will also fix the bug that was reported to me on Twitter, which is fixing the table of contents, which I haven't quite figured out how to automate. So that means it relies on my memory to do it. So good luck. Yeah. So without further ado, why don't we start with Jan? Can you kind of introduce yourself? Tell us what your role is, and and the team you're working on.
Sure thing. But before I do that, can you send me a link to those cool little graphics that you had on the first slide?
Exactly. Yeah, they're mine. They're all mine.
All right. Yeah. So my name is Jan Zeleny. I'm the manager of the Connected Customer Experience. That's the internal name of the team. Surprisingly enough, that team kind of stuck for the last couple of years. So we might be renaming the team soon.
Right. Any day now.
Yeah, exactly. And well, originally we started the team with like a broad vision of like, hey, we have a bunch of connected clusters here. Let's do something with it, something useful. Let's present some value back to the customers, and let's present some value to our engineers internally. It wasn't exactly clearer than that. Since then, we actually have a mission now, and let's see if I memorized it. People ask me so many times. I think our
Do
mission
you have
statement.
a bot command?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe next time.
Yeah.
Our mission statement is to improve the operational experience of connected customers and connected clusters. Whatever that means, we do that on so many fronts. We work with our support engineers. We work with our product engineers to improve the quality of the product. And obviously, we present some value back to the customers, so they are actually motivated, so that they can actually get some value for sending us their telemetry data. So that's in a nutshell, I guess.
Cool. All right. And so now this one's hard because I've never heard your name out loud.
I can do it.
So
I can do it.
But it depends on your nationality, which I'm not sure of. So it could be Ivan or Ivan, or there's others. Go ahead.
Ivan. It's Ivan Necas.
Nicely done.
Yeah, the surname was right. The first name, Langdon had it better, like with Ivan.
Sorry.
But I'm really used to all of that, so don't worry about it. So yeah, I'm a software engineer.
My name is Langdon,
working
to be clear.
Langdon.
Tell me about it, right? Like, I don't know how people look at it and figure out all different ways to pronounce it, but it's very impressive.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a software engineer working on the same team that Jan, so Connected Customer Experience. I officially or non-officially have the architect name in the role, even though I don't like this particular name because it just has a lot of assumptions people have about this particular role. And basically, I'm trying just to figure out like what would be the most important or interesting thing to do about our data and bring the impact back to our customers eventually. So that's in a nutshell what I'm trying to do, and then trying to get involved everyone that try or makes sense in this mission.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right. So obvious question. What does connected customer mean? Or let's put it slightly differently. What is the external facing? Like what do people who are our customers or users or whatever, what do they see that your team produces?
Mm-hmm. Let me answer that with a question. Have you ever heard of Red Hat Insights?
Yes, I have. In fact, we actually had. Oh no, I don't remember. We had somebody on the show talking about it. We had.
I think it was episode 36 or 37. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had Dorito on talking about subscriptions, which is kind of getting morphed into that, and then we did something with the Insights as well. Yeah, we've actually done a few different things. So yeah. So in a nutshell, this is the way I understand Red Hat Insights. It's like I am going to run, it's going to keep track for me of all my RHEL instances and kind of their current status and whether they're in good shape or not. Is kind of what I said in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's definitely true on the RHEL side. But lately, let's imagine Insights as a big overarching brand, not just RHEL specific, but like OpenShift, and in the future, perhaps Ansible as well. But CCX and what we do on the customer-facing side, is a first step for Red Hat to into the Insights world on the OpenShift side. So what we brought last year was you can call it like a tiny application. It's not that tiny actually, but it's the Insights Advisor for OpenShift, which it doesn't give you all the information you will see in RHEL, because in RHEL you have Advisor, you have vulnerabilities, compliance, all that stuff. On the OpenShift side, we have just Advisor, which gives you some recommendations about how to keep your cluster healthy. To put it in one sentence, we look for different types of recommendations related to stability, availability, performance, security. We have some security guidance as well. So that's what we have on the customer facing side. If you want to see that, I can actually show how it looks like.
Sure.
Yeah. All for
All right. Okay, so let me.
Pictures make it easier to understand things a lot of the time.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, so I hope you can see my screen now. So this is what you will see as a cluster admin. Either this web console right here, or you can have obviously command line access. You see that I'm logged into my server. So this is the regular stuff, right? And here you can already see the first glimpse of the Insights Advisor for OpenShift. You can see this is I installed this cluster just yesterday, so you can see that it's perfectly healthy. If you wanted to take a look at it in the OpenShift Cluster Manager, which is another nice app that we have on cloud.redhat.com, it will show you some details about a cluster. It seems that I'm logged in already. So this is the overview of my cluster. You can see multiple tabs. Insights Advisor is one of them. Again, you can see that everything is in a good shape. But what would you see if things weren't in a good shape? I actually prepared a short little demo where I'm gonna show some how does it look like? What Insights does for you as OpenShift admin.
So you're introducing problems, is what you're saying?
Yes, I'm intentionally going to introduce a problem here, and then we'll see what recommendations we get and how can we follow the recommendations so that the problems are fixed. So let's start with creating a couple new projects. So I'm going to create project and say project copy. So couple projects here, and I'm gonna skip a few steps now because obviously I would now create applications within those projects, put some code in and whatnot. But just for the sake of the demo, I'm gonna jump to almost the end and send some egress IPs for the project. I actually have this somewhere in my history, I hope.
The number of demos I've seen that are purely about the usage of bash history is very impressive, right?
Yeah, no surprise there. Okay, so I'm gonna patch net the namespace for the project and set the egress IP. Yeah, let's keep 100 here. So until now, everything is okay. This is not gonna do any, well, actually, this is gonna introduce one little thing already. But let me introduce another problem. I'm gonna keep the 100 here, and let's say I want to create an egress IP for my copy project, and I kind of forget to change the IP address here, right? So now I have two projects with the same egress IP. That can't be good, but well, it is possible that I kind of missed that for whatever reason. So now when I take a look at that namespace, just to check that everything, yep. So two projects with the same egress IP. Now Insights has a component collecting the data on OpenShift and sending that data back every couple hours. That component is called Insights Operator. And since it collects the data only a couple hours, you're going to see me, forcing that data upload a couple times here. And I'm going to do that by going to project Insight OpenShift Insights. Okay, OC get pods, and I'm gonna delete this pod, which is the Insights operator is gonna restart the pod, and as part of the restart, it's gonna upload the data. So in a little while, we'll probably see here that Insights is not available, which means we're on a good track. But the refresh takes a little while, so I'm going to switch to the OpenShift Cluster Manager, refresh the page to see if data was already uploaded and processed.
So when you say OpenShift cluster manager.
Yep.
So that's a single cluster you're looking at, though, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
This
For some reason, I hear that and I often think of ACM, like multi-cluster manager. I don't know why, but they get conflated in my head very easily.
It's not like we have a lot of acronyms floating around. No,
right. But at least we have. It was funny. Somebody made a joke like that yesterday, and they rattled off a very long-winded title or whatever, and I was like, "Oh, you forgot Red Hat has to be in the middle of it somewhere."
Of course. Yeah, I mean, you can see that you have a bunch of clusters here in OCM, but the functionality that we have with Insights at the moment is just a single cluster view. So that's why I use this view. But you can already see that the data I uploaded was uploaded and processed. You can see that the last check happened just now or 1 minute ago. Let's see, Insights on the cluster. This is the web console on the cluster. Insights here is not available here, meaning it's going to refresh any minute now, and I'm going to see pretty much the same information here. So let's go back to this one in a little while, and let's take a look at the recommendations. This is the first piece of value that you get from Insights Advisor. You can see that by doing what I did, I actually broke two things, and both related to cluster dropping some traffic. The first one, because two net namespaces contain the same egress IP. We kind of knew that was going to happen. But there is another one. None of the egress IPs I set to the projects is assigned to any node. So you can go here, take a look at the details. It will actually give you specific information about what's going on. You can see the names of the projects that are, or the net namespaces that are problematic. You can see the IPs that were set. And it gives you some basic guidance. And there is usually a link for more information like this one, which will take you to a OpenShift documentation about setting egress IPs. So let's try fixing this documentation alone, right? No, this one. So the duplicate egress IPs. So now, if I saw that recommendations, what I would probably do is to take a look at the namespaces, like I did the first time, and now I see that exactly what the recommendation told me, and okay, so I need to change my IP for this project. So little bash history magic again. And let's use 101. Quickly check what does it look like. Right, this should be now good. And again, I would need to wait for a couple hours for another data re-upload, but I can force it again.
How often does it kind of run by itself?
Every couple hours, like
okay.
once every 2 hours.
Yeah, so that's an important thing to note, right? Is that if you're doing a whole bunch of operational stuff, right, it's probably a good idea to kind of force a run. It might even be worth considering. Is there a way to kind of trigger it without having to delete the operator?
That's a good tip for the future.
Yeah, just because like you tend to go in and do a bunch of those bulk things at once, right? And then and it's like you need immediate feedback on that, not 2 hours later when you've already gone off to get a sandwich.
Yeah. That's a good point. We should definitely look into that one. And so yeah, now you can see that we're one recommendation down, one remaining. This data on the cluster hasn't updated yet, so you can see still the old one. Not available. So it's refreshing. That's good. So in a minute, I would see the same information as in the OpenShift Cluster Manager. Just one recommendation. So let's take a look at this recommendation. Okay, simple explanation. Let's see what are the remediation steps. Again, I see the IPs or the net namespaces. I get linked to documentation. Yeah, egress IPs for the project, It includes some information about the, here you see some information about the host subnet. So that's pretty much what I'm gonna do now. So I'm gonna fix this issue by following the recommendation and setting the egress IPs for assigning them to some host subnets. Get host. So quickly checking host subnets. You can see here that no egress IPs are set for any of the host subnets. So let's quickly check what are the. Okay, I'm gonna pick this worker node. Yeah, that's this host subnet. Batch host subnet again. Bash history magic. All right, then I'm gonna set basic. Oh, all right, different addresses here. You know, I can either do it this way, set some specific fixed egress IP to the host subnet, or I could do like a address range, whatever I prefer. In this case, I'm gonna do two specific addresses. Can check that is applied. Yeah, egress IPs. Both of the egress IPs are here. So you know the drill. OC get pod. Delete pod. Deleting pod and restarting it. Case takes a while. All right. Seems very good. So going back to the recommendations, see how fast we are. Okay, not that fast. It still hasn't uploaded. Let's do a refresh. Right. So you can see we're back to all cluster passed all recommendations, meaning we don't know about any known issues that would be affecting your cluster. And again, Insights is not available here. It will be reflected in a little while. So that's pretty much it. That's in a nutshell, you know, how you consume this stuff and how you get the value out of the Insights Advisor.
So I'm going to ask the hard question. What data do we collect?
Yeah, that's a good question. Obviously,
I mean, I have some docs that can help, but yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, we have a documentation on that because you know the data set changes, and it changes with every version, and sometimes we even backport some of the data collection code. And so yeah, I would point you to, if you search OpenShift documentation and you search if you look for section remote health, it gives you an overview of what data do we collect. I mean, and we also have, if you want to look at the code of Insights Operator, obviously it's open source. So if you go to our GitHub repo, which is in the OpenShift org, the repo is Insights Operator. We actually have a sample archive which shows you like how does the data structure look, and that will give you a good idea of what we collect.
So before we move on, so someone who we refer to as Netherlands Hackham made a joke about rarely ever getting to zero issues on their cluster. And so while we're kind of talking, and you know, because of the lag, sorry, if he could mention a couple of things in the chat that he's seen before, you know, that he doesn't feel like they can get fixed or whatever, that might be a useful thing to talk about. So
that's a good point. One thing about our recommendations, you know, there is a difference between Insights recommendations and alerts. Like you will see alerts in your cluster, you know, whenever something is out of ordinary. But sometimes, or you know, many times, these alerts are not exactly actionable. But they will, you know, there's some indication that something's going on. Whereas Insights recommendations, we publish recommendation only when we know specifically what's going on. We can detect the conditions, and we can also give you a recommendation, what to do about the situation, which alerts typically don't have. So you will see that there is many more alerts than Insights recommendations. So it is not uncommon for a cluster admin to see a long list of alerts, while Insight says like, everything is quote unquote okay.
Is there one somewhere where it just says light it on fire and go get a coffee? Because I think the temptation would be very, very high for me to put that in there somewhere.
I think at that point, Insights just hides and runs away, and you will see Insights is not available.
So so we go back to the connected part, right? So what's the point of that? Like, what do you like? Why is the cluster connected, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so I might try. So the basic idea was with the OpenShift 4, where in like OpenShift 3 and before, it was always a bit of a guesswork of like what problems users actually run into. We have the CI system and testing and QA department and all, ticketing customer cases and so on, but it still kind of doesn't give you the good picture of like what are the real problems that the customers have. And at the same time, like especially when comparing to managed services and cloud services, there is this deficiency of not being able to know like what problems the customers have was quite high, and people decided we need to do something about that. And that's where the idea of actually making the customers and clusters connected, which by this mean the clusters sending the health data about them or their health data to cloud and to cloud Red.com, to be more specific, where we have pipelines and processes to actually handle those data and to be able to do better decisions in terms of prioritization of the fixes and things like that. So basically, the main part here of what the connected cluster is the cluster that is sharing the health data with Red Hat for the further analysis. So there are two components providing this capability. We already talked about the Insights operator as being one of those. It would be a mistake to not mention the second one, which is the Prometheus/telemetry project that is sending a selected set of metrics to Red Hat as well. And we have a way how to then do the aggregations on top of this data to be able to actually help the customers either at the specific like single cluster level, and there are use cases for the support itself to be able to leverage this data without having to every time ask for mass gather to understand what the issue might be. But it's also for the more fleet-wide views where we can know what troubles are our customers hitting in order so that we can do their life better by doing better releases next time. So that's basically another use case besides just doing the direct recommendations to the customers, where the customers still benefit from this data, even though they might not see this as direct recommendation for them. So for example, like it's quite connected also to how we do the upgrade rollouts for OpenShift 4, where when we first do the release, it doesn't go or it's not available for every clusters. We have these fast and candidate channels, and compound to this, like when we release a new version, we are still monitoring closer the clusters that go through this upgrade and see what issues they are hitting, because even though we try our best, we do our best in terms of making sure that the things that we could think of don't break. There's still a chance that something that is specific to customers' environment might make some issues more obvious than what we could ever think. So this is basically one of the cases where before we roll out the upgrade to the wider range of customers, we are still watching like what's going on with the small set and things like that.
By the way, this is how I explain, what's the difference between connected customer experience and QE. Like, is the job of QE to make sure that like no issues go into production, in the ideal world, obviously. While this is not our job. Our job is to monitor, like, hey, this happened once. There is a chance that it's going to happen again, and if it happens, frequently enough, we need to work fast to make sure that it doesn't impact, like a big portion of the fleet.
Well, and also, I mean, one of the things that you're capturing, right, that QE, is never going to capture unless you actually change the development model, which is that operator introduced issues as well, right? So it's not just that the cluster is in bad shape because of the upgrade, right? It's because it may be that, in OpenShift 4.6, you had these two things, and they were okay, or weren't causing any problems. But then when you upgrade it to 4.8, now, that backported patch that you were relying on, or sorry, that's the wrong way, but like that bug you were relying on, it didn't necessarily realize it. You've now introduced it, right? Like my classic example of this, right, is when I think it was Windows 3.1. No, might have been later. Might have been Windows 98. But when it came out, Civilization, the video game, wouldn't run. Civilization 3, I think. And the reason is because they were relying on a bug in the OS to do something for performance reasons, right? Which is pretty typical for video game companies. So Microsoft actually reintroduced the bug into Windows to make Civilization work. So, like it goes both ways, but the point is that actually I almost failed a test, actually, like a certification test, because the documentation said that this thing worked one way, and I know from using it that a couple of those things did not work because there were bugs, and if you try to use them, things would go badly. And I had never read the documentation, right? I had just done the actual thing. So there's a lot of those, right, where you kind of, as a developer and operator, whatever, there's some issue or something that you have a workaround for, or, that you even don't know is a bug. And these are the kinds of things, right, that something like Insights is going to catch, but QE never will, right? They just, they don't have the data,
I just showed you one of those live.
Yeah, exactly. But that, I mean, but that one's obvious, right? Like, as in, that's just a straight up error, right? But there's also these other weirdness things that'll happen because, like I said, because a bug was patched, or because, the way something internal is working moved to a slightly different model, so it can be pretty subtle, more than just,
And I have actually an example of that. I prepared one of the demos, or like showcases of how this data actually being treated. So let me try to share my screen. So as I mentioned, the monitoring of the upgrades and looking at how it works is one of the things that we are looking into. So for example, like when we are like at some point in time, like this is not the fresh data, but something that I had a few months back, when we are looking at how long the upgrades take between different Y-stream versions, we've seen that for 4.7, there is more kind of variety of the length of the upgrade. So you could see this as the length of upgrades in hours, I think, and we've seen that there's something going on in there. So the next thing you are actually interested in, like, what are the common problems, common reasons why, out of the sudden in 4.7 upgrades that, longer than before. So what we kind of did as one of the views is basically looking at some common causes for clusters or upgrades taking longer, which especially in vSphere, we got to this symptom, which is connected to the vSphere problem detector. I don't have the more drill down example in here, but basically the gist of that was that many clusters in 4.6 had a problem in vSphere configuration, where even though the cluster thought that the vSphere is managed and it has the right credentials to do machine config operators and all these kind of underlying infrastructure operations on behalf of the administrator. In reality, the credentials actually were not set correctly because the users actually were not using this functionality. But at that point, the cluster itself actually was not doing any checks that know the credentials, whether they are correct or not. And when the 4.7 went out, this check was introduced. And what it caused is basically once upgrading to 4.7, the upgrade would basically stop at some point. Luckily, it was at the end, but it's still marked as unhealthy state, where it was complaining justifiably that the credentials are not there, so there's something wrong with the configuration. I can imagine winning this conversation over QE, that this is expected state. We want to let people know that something is wrong. The problem is that from the user perspective or customer perspective, the cluster was fine in 4.6, and they were actually not using this functionality, and the only thing that they noticed that the upgrade might get stuck eventually when they don't have this configured. So it took some time to have this discussion with our engineering to actually find better ways how to let people know that something is not right, but still not marking the operator is degraded, because that was just too intrusive to the customer and their workflow. So that's some of the example that shows like how we are actually monitoring the upgrades and looking at the common causes for upgrade failures. But it's also the difference between how one can look at this from the perspective of the engineering and quality assurance, and what's the perspective when looking at like what the customer is actually seeing and experiencing. So that, I think, covers one of those similar examples to what you mentioned with the bug in Windows, where we need to work with what people were used to, and actually not being too aggressive on fixing things that might be working for them. But let's put it in this way.
Yeah, it's a weird fine line. And to be clear, right, the Windows story, I did not hear it from a Windows engineer who introduced the bug. So for all I know, it's apocryphal, but I think it's a great story. So let's see, what was I going to say? Oh, so and Jan knows where this is going. How do you figure out what the rules are? So in other words, are you, your team, other people, whatever, sitting down with the data and kind of looking for issues and then looking for recommendations? Or, as like you said, Jan knows what's coming, are you introducing some AI here, some machine learning type models to try to predict what kinds of errors you might be getting?
So I'm gonna start with the simple ones. I would say it's actually all of those combined. Like the way we treat rules is that it's encoded knowledge of our support and product engineers. That's the value of OpenShift compared to Kubernetes, same as it is for RHEL compared to CentOS, for example, because we literally encode our knowledge into those rules. So we have nominations coming from support engineers, when they see a frequently occurring support cases, they nominate them for automation. They themselves use internal deployment of Insights Advisor, which you could see of internal deployment, where they have many more rules than what the customers see. Some of the rules are not as descriptive, but they still help the support engineers. Right. So that's our one source. And there are multiple other people who engage with customers and then bring back the knowledge and give us tips like, hey, we should get this recommendation or that recommendation. So that's like the trivial source of the nominations. But then
I wouldn't characterize it as trivial. That's actually very hard data to get. But it is simple, perhaps. Yeah.
It is simple in non-technical for us engineers. You don't need to code to get that information. Sometimes that's harder than coding, but whatever.
Yeah, right.
But then we have other sources, and I'm gonna let Ivan talk about those other sources, like you said, like some analytics and whatnot.
Yeah, so we might getting more into the AI and ML stuff, and one thing that me personally and many people, especially like having more practical experience with the underlying technologies, we are usually a bit more skeptical on seeing AI and ML solving all the problems just like that. and that actually confirms also our experience so far, where the ML part is actually the cherry on the top of the all the work that needs to be done before it can be applied. So we still want to leverage the data that are coming, but there is a long path before, like from the raw data to something that can be plugged into the machine learning models and benefit that from. So the first thing that we need to do is actually cleaning the data and having the right views. So it's like, even though some of this data might be queryable with PromQL, people start realizing that like running PromQL on larger data sets, and if you have too many time series coming in, it's not that trivial as if one had single cluster deployment and Prometheus on top of single cluster. So one thing that needs to be overcome is basically finding a different way to store this data and allow querying those so that you have the right views. So once you have that, you can also starting getting more people involved outside of just the data analytics itself. So we try, like in our team, we have a dedicated team that is more focused on looking at this data and trends and trying to do recommendations, for example, finding like what would be the best advices to choose and actually refine so that more people would be helped with that. But even better is to get these views to the people that actually understand the OpenShift better than we are, which are either engineers in OpenShift core, or those are the support engineers working on the cases, or our SRE engineers working on the OpenShift dedicated. And if we are able to get their eyes looking at the data that we have in some understandable way, that's, in my experience, more beneficial than trying to apply some machine learning models right away and finding some nice information that without any interpretation still this doesn't give you any value. So we at some point, I think, are even acting like translators between the engineers working on OpenShift and data scientists that we have within Red Hat that are working and experts on working with the data. So one thing that, for example, they have different language, or even worse, they use the same words for completely different things. So you can think about, like, if you tell cluster, or what was the other example? Feature. If you talk about clusters and features with OpenShift engineer, they see some new button to be added to the the deployments. When you talk about clusters and features with the data scientist, they see the clustering algorithms and selecting parameters that you feed in. And this is a simple example, but there are many of those where like there needs to be effort put into and understanding both worlds, so actually that benefits can be derived at the end. So that's something that we try to kind of help and basically help these different teams working together and getting the benefit out of the data. So I have some example as well on specific things where we are applying the more advanced stuff from, you could even call it machine learning. So I might share the screen again.
I just wanted to comment, one of the things I am most proud of at Red Hat is introducing the phrase, words are hard at Red Hat. And by extension, there's also words are hard in English, which is this problem, right? Where we have a lot of synonyms, there's a lot of jargon. And when you mix fields together, those jargon, conflicts really start to show up. But yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the word feature, because I've also played in both sides of that. AI, ML, data science. A feature means one thing. In software engineering, a feature means something completely different, which is kind of entertaining, I'm sure.
Yeah. So what we are looking at is some views at, like, we call it symptoms, because you can have either alerts that the clusters are sharing, or you can have degraded operators and different reasons for that. You can have the insights, rules, things like we've seen with egress. that also the clusters are reporting. So we unify these different data points, and we call it symptoms, and assign them some ID that we can work further with. So in this particular case, it was the monitoring operator marked as degraded. And what you can see at this graph is some spikes. So this on the x-axis, we see the different Z-string versions for the OpenShift, and on the y-axis, it's some hit rate in terms of how many clusters are seeing this particular problem in particular release. So so there is a lot of work to be done in order to get this view. If you have the raw PromQL, it's always on x-axis there is a time. So switching it in a way that you are not looking at the time series from the times perspective, but on the time series in terms of different versions, is some work to be done, and somebody needs to do this work. And then there's the second thing, is either looking at this and giving this in front of the eyes of the subject matter experts, or if the data allow that, we can try to do some auto detection of these things. So it seems at least in this example that it should not be that hard to find this kind of spikes or signals within the noise that we should actually notice early and act before it starts causing problems for many more users. So here is some visualization of how it looks in real world, where the red line is basically defining some thresholds based on the previous history of that particular trend, and if it crosses some boundaries, then we mark it as anomaly and something that people should be notified, and start looking into more details about the root cause of that problem. We still, it might be an alert or degraded operator. There might be more kind of root causes for that, so it still takes some time after the algorithms notice that, but it's the first step, being able to notice this quickly. So even this is not that obvious. It's obvious in this example, but when we actually start looking at it or applying these algorithms against every single symptom that we observe in OpenShift, you start noticing some things that are triggering the algorithms to send a notification, but in reality, it's not problem, and one needs to have some understanding of how OpenShift works, and what was the behavior of, for example, alerts when the installation or upgrades is happening before one can actually apply that. So there's still more work on the cleanup side than on the machine learning algorithms themselves. So that's something that I want to, I don't know how much stress I would put on this, that the data cleaning and making sure that makes sense is much more important than tweaking the algorithms and applying the latest machine learning neural networks on top of the data, because that's usually even simpler regressions might work quite well. So for example, in this case of having the spike detection, what was causing troubles is we tried to notice, whenever there's a new release, try to notice symptoms that have higher hit rate than what we were used to in the past. And one of the things that happens is that usually there are two ways to get to the specific version of the OpenShift. It's either via installation or via upgrade. And both of these processes include some intermittent alerts to be triggered because nodes are getting restarted, or it's just part of the installation and upgrade process that things are not great all at once, atomically. It's still some time where things might not be as expected, and that usually causes some alerts to be triggered. So when looking at the data from this perspective, we always got quite high hit rates on the fresh release when it got rolled out. And in order to clean this up before applying the machine learning, you need to exclude the times when the upgrades were happening, or you can focus on symptoms that are happening more than one day for one cluster and deriving the trends from that, which eliminates some of the noise, and then you get much reliable source of data to be able to do this kind of analysis on top of. So it's really interesting work, and a lot of detective work as well. So it's not just about looking at the data, but we many times need to dig deeper into like what the particular problem means, what are the dimensions of this within the Bugzilla or customer cases. And like once we learn how to do it manually, we try to apply some automated ways, and that's where it's the time to introduce some AI and ML stuff and makes the better use of that. Before that, I would never recommend trying or jumping directly to ML without understanding how the data work and how the people work within the particular problem domain. So that's pretty much my experience with the ML stuff.
So I think it's funny, right? When like, I don't think it's a catchphrase yet, but it really should be, which is like 50% of any machine learning project is data cleanup. Maybe it's 80%. It's a classic challenge. One thing I want to do is take a break here for a second, and we'll talk about our sweet internet points.
Just about to remind you about that. Yeah.
But then I had one more question for you all when we get back. Hopefully we'll have time. So let me share the screen again. And I will explain what we're talking about as well. Oh, that is not what I meant to do at all. All right, so these are our sweet internet points. So we like to give out points for, oh shoot, that's the wrong code. So I will also get the correct code, but do not use the one on the screen. Yeah. But actually, hey, Chris, why don't you explain the sweet internet points?
Yes, I will happily do that while you get the codes. So our sweet internet points are essentially awesomeness in a point thing. So, there's ways to get points from anywhere from watching the episode and just submitting the code for points to maybe issuing a pull request or issue against the repository that was linked earlier in the show today, which I will drop another link to as soon as I'm done talking. So, participation basically equals points, and using these codes, inserting them into the form will get you your sweet internet points, which we hope
have corrected, or I'm about to throw in the chat.
Yeah, hit refresh or something. But the points right now are bragging rights, but they will have an intrinsic value of some sort in the very near future. Extrinsic, sorry, Jesus, I keep getting this mixed up. Extrinsic value. Yeah, even NL Hackham caught that it was last week's code. Wow, good for him. Yeah. So the idea is build up your points. Eventually, they'll be worth real stuff, or you can exchange your points for real stuff, I should say. So Langdon, thank you for dropping the codes in there. I will grab the repo. If you want to brush up anything I said, feel free.
No, I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, so there's an activities markdown page on the episodes repo, which gives you some ideas for how you can participate to earn points. As you may have, as you probably can't tell, but so some of the leaders on this board have not just submitted episode points. So there's other ways to do it. Please check those out, and that way you can kind of catch up to the leaders. Obviously, if it was just watching all the episodes, that wouldn't necessarily be enough. So,
because you'd only have 3,900 points, right?
Well, there's escalators. So there's escalators. So, so at periodic points, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but when you have a certain number of episodes, then you actually get a bonus set of points for having collected that many episodes. And so, so it was just a way to kind of make doing the show a little more fun, participating in the show a little bit more fun. And we really normally Red Hat is very good at producing kind of prizes for things. For some reason, this particular show has been cursed. Storm. Yeah, and so we've gone through multiple vendors, we've gone through various T's and C's and challenges like that, and but we think we believe they're ironed out. We're not quite sure why we haven't gotten over that last little hump, but we're so close. As you can see, we haven't even gotten this swag, right? So That
Yeah.
should tell you something.
That should tell you a lot, because normally like they're Johnny on the spot with the folks
Right.
that are doing the thing.
Yes,
Getting
exactly.
the swag. Yeah.
Yeah. So the last question I wanted to ask you was kind of the, your examples so far have mostly been about problems. Are you currently doing or planning to do things where it's more like improvements? So in other words, like, because I'm an average OpenShift admin, I know to set up things the way the docs tell me to, right? But because I have this particular confluence of events, I'm running, 32 web servers and 6 databases, and, I'm running PHP 3.7, I don't know. Because of that combination of things, if I tweak this variable over here, I will get overall better performance, let's say. Are you looking at stuff like that, or are you trying to cover the bread and butter first, in a sense?
Yeah, all at once. So I mentioned in the beginning, performance, for example, is one of the four categories that we pursue. In some cases that can be performance problems. In other cases that can be performance optimizations. We're no different than Insights for RHEL that way. I remember one, and that's RHEL specific, but I remember one specifically where, there was a recommendation, still is. And when you have a certain RHEL setup and you run Oracle database on top of that RHEL setup, these licenses are expensive as hell, right? And in many cases, the admins run them in a non-optimal way, and thus they have to pay even more for licenses because they need to have more hardware and whatnot. So we give recommendations about optimizing their setup that increase their performance. So that's what we do across the board, both on RHEL and on OpenShift. I'll say that coming up with these improvements is much more difficult. So you will not see as many of them as you see with problems, because like I said, one thing about Insights recommendation, they need to be specific. They need to tell you, like, this is what you do now. Like pointing out, like, hey, you have a performance problem here. Like, that doesn't help much, right? And that's part of the reason why it's more complicated. But it's definitely on the table.
Yeah, and another thing I would like to mention is about the collection of the data, and we don't want our users to feel as we are spying on them. Which the more you get to the workload specific things, the more risk like this might be felt. So that we need to be even more cautious and making sure that we collect just enough data that can bring value back to the users, and especially going to the workload specific stuff. There might be more and more specific things that would need to be collected before we would be able to do this kind of recommendations. So one thing that probably is the next on the table when looking beyond the OpenShift core operators would be looking at the combination or getting the health data from the OLM operator space, which gives you some more, and basically giving more recommendations that would be specific to some operator, and especially when combining with the health of the cluster itself, this can lead to some of the recommendations that would be more workflow specific. But right now, the first thing that people should do is keep their clusters updated. That's the best way, or one of the best ways how to get the most out of your OpenShift clusters, I would say, is having the latest version, because you have all the fixes and improvements that got there over time. So that's why we want to make sure that the upgrade path and the health of the clusters is safe, so that people, it's even no-brainer for them to be on the latest release, which eventually also have the impact on the workloads running on those. One of the first things people get recommended when talking about any issue that is in OpenShift is, have you tried to upgrade to the latest version? And many times, it can be the way that fixes the problem. So it's part. Our job is basically make sure that the upgrades are safe as possible. And another one is also letting people know that when they upgrade, they are multiple improvements that might be actually specific to that particular deployment. So we have a couple of recommendations that tell you specifically, like, we see you have this problem and we know it's fixed in next RHEL version. We recommend upgrading. So that's the main point right now. As Jan mentioned, yes, the workloads are something that we would like to get to at some point, but it's much more complicated than we would be just deciding that we'll do this as the next thing. There are more things to be considered with that.
And that's not my problem that it's more complicated. Like, just get on that. That's what I need. Yeah.
Like
so
I said, it's on the table.
yeah. So related to that too is another thing that I'd be interested in, right? Is that, and we're starting to run out of time, but it's kind of, how interesting is it if I, as a single, end user, customer, whatever you want to call it, have multiple clusters, all reporting into insights. Is there interesting stuff that happens there, right? Where you have, maybe you still need to get into workloads, whatever, but is there, can you start to make recommendations like, oh, you're running, 80% of your utilization on one cluster. You have 4 of them that are bored. You might want to go fix that. That's like a stupid example.
Yep. Yeah. So, well, the first thing that needs to be there is like what you saw in my demo was a single cluster view. But what Advisor for RHEL has, and we don't at the moment, is a recommendation view. Like, hey, here is a specific recommendation, and here is the list of clusters that are affected. That's currently a work in progress. And yeah, that's where you start. Other than that, I don't know. Like anything can happen. Like, we have tons of ideas. We have a very creative product manager. I'll say that.
Yeah. I've met him once or twice.
And Martin also mentioned that we are not the only team like working with this and making sure that there is the most out of the remote health data leverage. So even though it might not be in the realm of us like solving this particular problem as resource optimizations, if you like, there are other things within Red Hat that would be probably better to speak to in terms of the cluster-wide views and recommendations on that. I guess even people from the advanced cluster manager would have things to say and features on their roadmap on that particular problem. So we, as I mentioned, we try to be the catalyst of leveraging the data for the benefit of the users, but it doesn't mean that our team would be providing all the features that the customers could be benefiting from.
By way of explanation, the product manager is Radek, right? Yeah, so their product manager used to be my boss, so that's why.
Mine too.
Yeah, right, exactly. Anything else we should cover quickly, Chris? Do we have any impending questions aside from, is Perl still in active use? Which
it's still very much in active use.
Is.
Yeah. No other questions really.
Okay.
Except for that AI/ML one, which we kind of handled.
Right.
By the way, what you saw Ivan presenting on the spike detection, just to give you an idea how fresh that is, that's being worked on right now. Like, there are other team members who work on that very algorithm today. So that's fresh out of the oven.
Yeah, as we often disclaim on the show, we often are showing things that may or may not be from the future. Because we're trying to kind of show you exactly what we're working on, what we're thinking about, all that kind of stuff. So please, take anything you see with a grain of salt. These are the ideas we're going down, but it doesn't necessarily mean we'll actually be able to ship it for whatever reason.
I would be remiss if I didn't say, please like, subscribe, and share wherever you're following
us
or watching us from, I should say. So
we need our catchphrase one of these days.
I know, we need to come up with something amazing.
We need to incorporate coffee somehow. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I need an infusion of coffee.
As do I.
Pot is empty.
Thanks so much, y'all. We really appreciate people coming by.
That was great.
Talking about what they're doing. I think this is this is kind of next level after what we've been talking about, right? It's like you get using containers, then you realize you need them orchestrated, and then you start to realize, what can I do to optimize that environment that they're kind of running in, and that's where insights takes place. And I think personally, I think that whole like cloud.redhat.com kind of aggregated experience or whatever is getting really cool. There's lots and lots of stuff there that is really useful. So if you haven't checked it out for any reason, you should go look at that in general.
Thank you for inviting us, Langdon. It was fun.
Cool. Awesome.
Been a blast.
Thank you very much.
All right, so coming up later today on the channel, we have the one and only Andrew Sullivan with Ask an OpenShift Admin coming up here at 11 Eastern, 1500 UTC. We'll be talking about authentication and authorization. So tune in for that. I'm excited for it, believe it or not.
Just block everyone. No one has any permissions.
Only
ever.
you needs access to this network.
As a former developer, just give me admin and nothing else.
right. Yeah. So as Bacon Fork mentioned, stay cool out there, folks. I know here in the Northern Hemisphere, it's been just absolutely brutal in some locations. So yeah, stay safe out there, folks. And we'll catch you next time. See ya.